The grandfather clock in the foyer of the manor house struck 2, the hollow, mournful chimes reverberating through the cavernous, empty halls like the heartbeat of a dying giant. It was a Tuesday, painted in the relentless, suffocating gray of an English afternoon, the kind of weather that seeps into the bones and whispers of old sorrows. Alexander's leather briefcase, crafted from the finest Italian hide, slipped from his grip. It struck the cold, polished marble floor with a dry, violent crash that echoed like a gunshot in a library. But Alexander did not blink. He did not breathe. His imposing figure, usually a tower of dominance and control, had become a statue of ice, paralyzed by the impossible scene unfolding before his eyes through the condensation fog glass panes of the conservatory. Alexander, the most feared CEO in the city, a man who had forgotten the sensation of a smile since the earth had swallowed his wife's coffin exactly 1 year ago, should not have been there. His first-class flight to New York was scheduled to depart from Heathrow in 3 hours. But a presentiment, a phantom tightness in his chest, a claustrophobic panic he could not explain, had forced him to command his driver to turn the Bentley around and return to his manor house, that empty fortress of feelings where he existed, a ghost haunting his own life, surrounded by opulence that tasted like ash in his mouth. No one was expecting the Ice Lord at home. The staff, usually invisible shadows who feared his icy glare, used to scatter and hide when the gravel crunched under his tires. Silence was the only music allowed in that house since the tragedy, a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. But today, the silence had been shattered. As he crossed the vaulted entrance hall, Alexander had heard something he thought extinct in his universe. The sound of water splashing. Not the rhythmic, polite trickle of a decorative feature, but a chaotic, joyous splashing. And then, even more shocking, a high-pitched, bubbling, pushed sound that stopped his heart cold in his chest. He walked like a phantom towards the conservatory, drawn by that impossible noise, guided by a desperate hope he dared not acknowledge. And there was the image that almost made his knees buckle and the darkness claim him. Eleanor, the new maid who had only been employed in the manor house for 3 weeks, was kneeling on the damp terracotta tiles next to the indoor volcanic stone fountain. She paid no mind to her spotless blue uniform, which was now sodden, dotted with dark water stains that clung to her skin. She was wearing those ridiculous, bright yellow rubber cleaning gloves, the mark of her station. But what her hands were doing was not cleaning. Her hands, sheathed in shiny latex, held Master Harry with infinite, trembling delicacy. Harry, his 1-year-old son, little Master Harry, the child whom the most expensive specialists on Harley Street had labeled as emotionally traumatized. A lost cause. The baby who had ceased to make a single sound since the horrific accident that claimed his mother. Harry was soaked from head to toe, water dripping from his eyelashes, and he was laughing. It wasn't a shy, tentative smile. It was a vibrating, resonant sound of laughter, an explosion of irrepressible, raw joy as he slapped the water with his chubby little hands, sending cascades of droplets splashing onto Eleanor's face. "That's it, my love," Eleanor said, her voice warm and rich like melted honey, ignoring the fact that the chlorinated water was ruining her hairstyle. "Look how the drops are shining. Catch the drops, Master Harry. Catch them." The natural light that filtered through the rain-streaked glass ceiling bathed the scene, creating an almost divine halo around the humble employee and the baby. The contrast was brutal, visceral. The humble woman with her cheap cleaning gloves and wet knees was accomplishing what a legion of graduate nurses, renowned child psychologists, and toys worth thousands of pounds had failed to achieve in 12 months of suffocating darkness. Alexander felt his legs failing him. He leaned heavily against the mahogany doorframe, unable to draw breath into his burning lungs. Watching his son laugh was like watching a dead man rise from the grave. Harry's laughter bounced off the glass walls and plunged straight into Alexander's shattered soul, breaking the shell of coldness he had built to survive the agony of his existence. For a second, the image blurred, obscured by the hot, unfamiliar sting of tears that filled his gray eyes. Eleanor scooped up some water with her gloved hands and let it fall like a gentle English rain on the baby's head. Harry closed his eyes in ecstasy, tipped his head back, and let out a cry of pure, unadulterated happiness. "Mom," the baby stammered between laughs. A word he had never uttered, a word buried in the wreckage of the past. Alexander's world stopped. Time froze, the ticking of the universe suspended. The sound of that word was the final blow to his composure. His briefcase fell to the floor, the noise of the leather hitting the marble breaking the spell like a hammer shattering glass. Eleanor turned her head sharply, terror painted in stark white strokes across her face. Her large, humble eyes met the imposing dark figure of Alexander standing in the doorway like an avenging angel. The smile was erased instantly from her lips. She saw the master, the man who fired people for a microscopic stain on a shirt, staring at her, while she held his air soaked in dirty water from a decorative fountain. Eleanor knew she needed this job to eat. She knew she had broken every rule of etiquette in the manor house. Panic seized her throat. The terror paralyzed Eleanor. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it fluttering like a trapped bird against her ribs. In a clumsy, desperate move, she tried to dry the baby's face with the wet sleeve of her uniform while she crawled backward on her knees, moving away from the fountain as if she had committed a capital crime. Sir Alexander, she stammered, her voice broken by impending fear. I'm sorry, I swear I didn't want to wet him. We were just... Please don't fire me. I need this job. My mother is sick. Please. Eleanor lowered her head, waiting for the screams, waiting for the fury that was legendary among the staff. In that house, the rules were strict, written in stone. The cleaning staff cleans, the nannies take care. She was the cleaning girl, the one who mopped the floors, the invisible one. She had no right to touch Master Harry, much less to put him in the decorative fountain in the lobby. She saw Alexander's black leather shoes advancing towards her. One step, two quick, determined steps. The sound of his footsteps on the marble echoed like death sentences. Eleanor closed her eyes and shrank back, instinctively curling her body to protect the baby, fearing that the man would violently snatch the child from her unworthy arms. Forgive me, sir, she begged again, trembling, but the cry of rage never came. Instead, she felt a large, firm hand clutching her shoulder, not with violence, but with a desperate, clinging urgency. Eleanor opened her eyes and gasped. Alexander, the untouchable millionaire, the ice lord of London, had knelt on the wet floor. His 3,000-pound suit was soaking up the water from the terracotta, his knees dug into the hard stone, caring nothing for the pain or the dirt. But what struck Eleanor the most was not seeing the master on his knees, but seeing his face. The Ice Lord was crying. Thick, silent tears were streaming down his perfectly shaved cheeks, carving paths through the mask of stoicism he had worn for a year. His eyes, normally gray and hard as steel, were red-rimmed and filled with such raw, bleeding emotion that Eleanor had to look away for a second, feeling she was witnessing something too private, too sacred. Alexander's voice was a hoarse, broken whisper when he finally spoke. How did you do it? Eleanor looked at him, confused, still hugging the wet baby against her heaving chest. Sir Alexander reached out a trembling hand and touched his son's cheek. Harry, far from being frightened by the tension, looked at his father and let out a soft giggle, grabbing Alexander's finger with his wet little hand. He's been silent for a year, Alexander said, and the sentence came out like a choked sob. For a whole year without making a sound. The best doctors on Harley Street told me that the trauma of the accident had blocked his speech and emotions. I was told to prepare myself to have a child who might never connect with me. I have spent fortunes on therapists who came with their tablets and their educational toys, and he just stared at them with empty, dead eyes. Alexander looked up and fixed his eyes on Eleanor. He no longer looked at her as an employee, as a unit of labor, but as someone who had just performed a biblical miracle right under his nose. I arrive early today and I find you, the girl who cleans the windows, and my son is laughing. Laughing. Alexander squeezed Eleanor's shoulder harder, almost desperately. Tell me, what did you do? I need to know. What magic did you use? Eleanor swallowed, feeling the fear turn into a strange, warm compassion. She saw the mangled man behind the expensive suit, the father bleeding out from grief. I didn't do anything special, sir, she said honestly, looking down at her yellow gloves. I just saw him looking at the water. Looking at the water? Yes, he was in his car seat where the nurse always leaves him in front of the TV while she chats on her mobile phone. Eleanor blurted out the truth without thinking. and she felt Alexander's jaw tense, a muscle jumping in his cheek. The boy was looking at the fountain, sir. He was thirsty for life, not for screens. So I put down the mop, got him out of the chair, and brought him here. Eleanor took a deep breath and continued, gaining confidence as she saw that Alexander drank in her every word like a man dying of thirst. Children don't need expensive toys, Sir Alexander. They need to get dirty. They need to feel the cold water, touch the leaves of the plants. They need someone to tickle them and talk to them by looking into their eyes, not by looking at a clock. I just played with him, just as I played with my little brothers in the village. I taught him to splash. Alexander looked at the scene, the spilled water, the squeaky rubber gloves, the cheap polyester uniform. Everything was so imperfect, so far from the pristine standards of his luxurious life. And yet, it was the only real thing in that house. The nurse, Alexander muttered, his tone suddenly changing it from excitement to a cold, razor-sharp fury. Where is the contract nurse? The specialist from the agency who charged £4,000 this month? She is in the kitchen, sir, drinking coffee and talking on the phone, Eleanor answered quietly. Alexander stood up slowly. Water was dripping from his designer trousers, creating dark pools on the floor, but he no longer looked like the defeated man of a few minutes ago. There was a new fire in his eyes, a fierce, protective determination. Get up, Eleanor, he ordered, but his voice was gentle with her. Eleanor carefully got up, carrying Harry on her hip. The baby rested his head on the servant's shoulder, totally relaxed and happy, his breathing syncing with hers. Listen to me, Alexander said, taking his wallet out of the inside pocket of his jacket and throwing a wad of bills on the glass table, without even counting them, as if money were trash, mere paper without value compared to what he had just witnessed. From this second, your cleaning obligations end. I don't want to see you scrubbing a single dish or cleaning a single toilet in this house anymore. Eleanor opened her eyes immeasurably. You're firing me? Quite the opposite. Alexander took a step toward her, invading her personal space with an intensity that made Eleanor blush. I'm going to triple your salary. I'm going to give you full private medical insurance for you and your sick mother. You will have a driver if you need one, but on one condition. Alexander pointed to his son, who was playing with a button on Eleanor's uniform. Your only job, your only mission in this life from today is to make him keep laughing. No one else touches him, only you. Understood? Before Eleanor could respond, before she could process that her life had just changed in a heartbeat, the front door of the manor house slammed open. The sound of high heels, sharp and aggressive like gunshots, echoed in the lobby, quickly approaching towards the conservatory. Alexander! A female voice, shrill and loaded with false concern, broke the magical atmosphere. What is your car doing outside? You were supposed to be flying to New York already. It was Victoria, Alexander's fiancée, a woman of high society, impeccable, blonde, and as cold as the marble on the floor. She entered the conservatory and stopped in her tracks when she saw the scene. Her eyes scanned Alexander with his wet trousers and then settled with absolute disgust on Eleanor. She looked at the yellow rubber gloves touching the baby's branded clothes with the horror of someone seeing a rat on a wedding cake. What the hell is going on here? Victoria asked, wrinkling her nose as if she smelled something rotten. Why does that maid have Master Harry? Get those rubber hands off him before some poor man's disease hits him. The air in the room became unbreathable. Alexander turned his head slowly towards his fiancée, and Eleanor felt a chill. The war had just begun. The silence that followed Victoria's scream was colder than the deepest winter ice. Eleanor instinctively pressed Harry to her chest, covering the baby's ears with her gloved hands to protect him from the woman's shrill and poisonous tone. The little one, feeling the tension vibrating in the air, stopped laughing and hid his face in the employee's neck, looking for shelter from the sudden storm. Alexander did not move immediately. He stared at his fiancée, but not with the love or deference she expected. He looked at her as one who looks at a stranger who has just interrupted a sacred rite. Keep your voice down, Victoria, Alexander said in a dangerously low and controlled tone. You're scaring my son. Victoria blinked, offended. She took a step back, smoothing her immaculate designer dress, and pointed an accusing finger at Eleanor, who was trembling next to the fountain, I'm scaring him. She let out an incredulous, nervous laugh that sounded like glass breaking. Alexander, for God's sake, look at that scene. You have the toilet girl, a woman who probably cleans latrines with those same gloves, hugging the heir to your empire. It's unhygienic. It's demeaning. That child has a delicate immune system. Alexander took a step closer to Victoria, ignoring her complaints about germs. His presence was imposing, charged with an authority that made Victoria close her mouth abruptly. What that child has, Victoria, is a father who has been blind, he said, turning to look at Eleanor, instantly softening his gaze. And what you call unhygienic, I call the first moment of genuine happiness Harry has had in 365 days. At that very moment, the kitchen door opened. The head nurse, Miss Beatrice, entered, a 50-year-old woman in a starched white uniform, with a university degree and a perpetual attitude of superiority. She walked in with a cup of coffee in one hand and her mobile phone in the other, laughing at something on the screen. When she looked up and saw the soaked bushes in the furious fiancé, the coffee cup trembled in her hand. "Sir Alexander," the nurse exclaimed, putting the mobile phone awkwardly in her pocket. "No, I didn't know you were back. I was preparing the child's snack, and—" "Silence!" Alexander didn't scream, but the word cut the air like a knife. He walked towards her. Every step echoed in the conservatory. "I pay you £4,000 a month, Beatrice. 4,000. I gave you an apartment in the West Wing. I gave you unlimited access to the credit card for the child's needs." Alexander stopped half a meter from her. "And where were you while my son was alone in the lobby?" I I just went to the kitchen for a minute. The boy was safely in his chair," the woman stammered, turning pale. "He was tied to a chair in front of a TV," Alexander corrected coldly. "While this woman whom you pointed out, Eleanor, to whom you pay the minimum wage and to whom no one gave instructions, was the only one able to see that my son needed a human, not a machine." Alexander pointed to the front door with a gesture of finality. "You're fired. You have 10 minutes to get your things out of my house. If you are still here in 11 minutes, I will call security and have you forcibly removed." "But, sir, I have a contract. You can't—" "Out!" Alexander's roar made the conservatory windows vibrate. Harry was startled, but Eleanor began to gently rock him, whispering things in his ear to calm him down. And the child instantly relaxed. The nurse ran out, sobbing. Victoria watched the scene with her mouth open, unable to process that her fiancé had just kicked out a qualified professional for defending a random maid. Alexander turned back to Eleanor. The transformation on his face was immediate, from the fury of the dragon to the protective calm. "Eleanor," he said, ignoring the presence of Victoria, "what I told you before is serious. Your salary will triple from now on. I don't want you to touch a broom anymore. Your job is Harry. Do you accept?" Eleanor looked at Alexander, then at Victoria, whose eyes were distilling pure hatred. She knew that to accept was to declare war on the future mistress of the house. But then she felt Harry's little hand grabbing her finger, clinging to it as if it were his only lifeline in a sea of loneliness. Eleanor lifted her chin. For the first time, she didn't feel like the cleaning girl. "I accept, sir," she said in a firm voice, "but on one condition." Victoria let out a snort. "Condition? Now servitude sets conditions? This is the last straw, Alexander." Alexander raised a hand to silence Victoria and nodded towards Eleanor. "What do you need?" "I need you to let me take care of him in my own way," Eleanor said, looking directly into the millionaire's eyes. "No rigid schedules of tablets, no lock-ins in the padded room. If he wants to play with dirt, he will play with dirt. If he wants to laugh, he will laugh. I want carte blanche to be human with him." Alexander gave a half smile, the first one in a year, a smile that lit up his tired face and made him look 10 years younger. "Granted." Victoria felt a knot in her stomach. It wasn't just rage at insubordination. It was something more dangerous. She had seen that smile on Alexander. And that smile wasn't just about the baby. It was because of the woman who was holding him. "Good," Victoria said, regaining her cool, calculating composure. She walked over to Alexander and put a hand on his chest, marking territory. "If that's what you want for Harry, my love, I support you. But that girl needs a bath urgently. She smells of chlorine and poverty." Victoria looked at Eleanor with a sharp smile. Welcome to the new post, dear. I hope you are up to it, because in this house, mistakes are paid very dearly. 2 days later, the atmosphere in the manor house had changed radically. Where before there was a sepulchral silence, now from time to time small noises of life were heard. Eleanor had kept her word. She had not put on her cleaning uniform again. Alexander had ordered that comfortable and simple clothes, suitable for playing with a child but of good quality, be brought to her. She was now wearing beige linen trousers and a soft white blouse. She looked radiant, and most importantly, Harry did not separate from her. They were in the back garden under the shade of a century-old oak tree. Eleanor was sitting on the grass, and Harry was trying to take his first wobbly steps towards her, laughing every time he lost his balance and fell on the soft grass. From the balcony on the second floor, Victoria was watching the scene with theater binoculars. Her knuckles were white from squeezing the metal so hard. Look at her, she whispered to herself. She thinks she's the owner of the manor house. She thinks she's the mother. What bothered Victoria the most was not that Eleanor was taking care of the child. What consumed her inside was what she had seen that morning at breakfast. Alexander, who used to read the financial news on his tablet without speaking to anyone, had stayed an extra 10 minutes at the table, simply watching as Eleanor fed porridge to Harry in the high chair. Alexander had laughed. He had crossed glances with the employee. There was a complicity being born there, a spark that Victoria had never managed to ignite in 3 years of calculated relationship. Victoria put down the binoculars and went to the garden. She needed to set the record straight. When she reached the oak tree, Eleanor was helping Harry to get up. Upon seeing the lady, Eleanor immediately tensed up and took the baby in her arms, standing up as a sign of respect. "Good morning, Miss Victoria," Eleanor said, looking down. Victoria did not respond to the greeting. She walked slowly around Eleanor, examining her like one who examines a defective fair horse. "Those clothes look great on you," Victoria said dismissively. "And the color does not favor you, although, of course, I guess anything is better than those blue rags you were wearing before." "Sir Alexander insisted that I be comfortable so I could run after Master Harry," Eleanor replied, remaining calm. "Sir Alexander," Victoria mimicked in a mocking voice. "Don't get confused, dead mosquito. Alexander is grateful because you managed to get the child to stop drooling and start acting normal. It's gratitude, nothing more. Don't start weaving fantasies into that little head of yours." Victoria got so close that Eleanor could smell her expensive and cloying perfume. "You are the nanny, the glorified maid. The moment Harry grows up a little and needs a real high-level education, we'll give you a kick and you'll go back to mopping floors or to the street where you came from. Do you understand?" Eleanor looked up. Her normally sweet eyes sparkled with an unexpected dignity. Life had hit her hard. She had fled a violent past. She had been hungry. But she wasn't going to let anyone trample on her now that she had someone to protect. "I perfectly understand my place, miss," Eleanor said in a soft but firm voice. "My place is where Master Harry needs me, and as long as Sir Alexander wants me here, I will be here. Not because of the money or the clothes, but because this child needs love, not someone to look at him with binoculars from the balcony." Victoria's face was disfigured with anger. "How dare you, insolent wretch!" Victoria raised her hand, ready to slap the employee. "Victoria!" Alexander's voice echoed behind them. Victoria froze with her hand in the air, quickly transforming the gesture into a movement to arrange her hair. She turned around with a fake, bright smile. "Love," cried Victoria. "You came from the office early. I was just taking a bee off Eleanor's shoulder. Wasn't I, Eleanor?" Alexander came closer. He didn't look at Victoria. He looked at Eleanor, looking for any sign of fear or harm. Then he looked at his fiancée with an arched eyebrow. He wasn't stupid. He knew Victoria and her class temperament. "Be careful with the bees, Victoria," Alexander said with a double meaning. "I don't want anyone to get stung in my garden." He bent down and took Harry in his arms. The boy, seeing his father, slapped him on the cheek and smiled. Alexander closed his eyes, enjoying the contact. "Eleanor, get a small suitcase ready for Harry," Alexander said without opening his eyes. "I want to take them to the lake house this weekend. Clean air will do the child good. For both of you." "To the lake house?" Victoria intervened with a high-pitched voice. What a great idea, love. I have a new bikini that... You don't, Victoria. Alexander cut her off by opening his eyes and staring at her. You have that charity gala you've been talking about so much. I don't want you to miss it by being bored in the country with us. I will go alone with Harry and Eleanor. It's a father and son journey. Eleanor goes only for assistance. It was a direct blow to Victoria's ego. It was a humiliation. He was going to go away for a whole weekend, just to an isolated cottage with the maid. Victoria felt her blood boiling. She nodded stiffly. Of course you are right. The gala is important. Have fun. Victoria turned around and walked towards the manor house. Her heels dug furiously into the grass. She kept the smile until she entered the house and closed the door of his private office. Then the mask fell off. She threw a porcelain vase against the wall, shattering it. She was breathing heavily like a cornered animal. That servant was not only taking away her place, she was taking away her control over Alexander and therefore her control over the fortune. If Alexander fell in love with the nanny, the marriage would be canceled. The millions would disappear. Victoria took out a disposable phone that she had hidden in a safe behind a painting. Her fingers, with perfect manicure, marked a number that was not on her official agenda. She waited for tones. Yes, replied a husky, masculine voice on the other side. We have a problem, Victoria said, looking out the window towards the garden, where Alexander and Eleanor were laughing together with the baby. The garbage I told you to investigate has become a major obstacle. I need you to speed up the plan. That will cost twice as much if you want it fast, the voice said. I'll pay you triple, hissed Victoria, but I want her to disappear from this house. I don't care how. I want Alexander to hate her. I want him to see her as a thief, a criminal, or worse. Roger that. Prepare the ground. We're performing tonight. Victoria hung up the phone and smiled as she saw her reflection in the mirror. Enjoy your weekend, Eleanor, she whispered, because it will be the last one you spend under this roof. Night fell over the manor house like a heavy, suffocating cloak. It was only 8 hours until the trip to the lake house, and the tension in the air was electric. Eleanor was in her small maid's room, carefully folding the few clothes she had for the trip. Her heart overflowed with a naive illusion. For the first time in years, she felt that life was giving her a break. She was going to leave the city, she was going to see trees, water, and she was going to be with Harry and Alexander away from Victoria's poisonous gaze. She did not notice that the door of her room had been quietly ajar. Victoria entered without knocking, walking with the stealth of a snake. In her hands, she was carrying a pile of fluffy white towels. Here you go, Victoria said in a strangely sweet voice that made Eleanor flinch. Alexander wants you to take these special towels for the baby. They are made of Egyptian cotton. We don't want his skin to get irritated by the sheets in the cabin, do we? Eleanor immediately stood up, surprised by the change in attitude. Thank you, Miss Victoria. I'll put them away right now. Don't bother. I'll help you. Victoria left the towels on the bed, and with a quick and calculated movement, she accidentally pushed her designer bag against Eleanor's old cloth backpack that was open on the chair. As Eleanor turned to arrange the towels, Victoria's hand slipped like lightning into her own bag. She took out a heavy golden object and dropped it at the bottom of Eleanor's backpack, quickly covering it with a worn sweater from the employee. Ready, said Victoria, smiling coldly. Are you all ready for your great adventure? Victoria left the room before Eleanor could say anything more. Eleanor felt a chill, a bad premonition that she couldn't identify, but she ignored it. She had to focus on Harry. Half an hour later, chaos erupted in the main hall. Alexander was checking some emails on his mobile phone, waiting for Eleanor to come down with the baby to give the last instructions to the driver, when Victoria ran down the stairs, faking an absolute panic attack. He's not there! He's not there! Cried Victoria, stirring the sofa cushions frantically. Alexander, you have to do something. Alexander looked up, frowning. What are you talking about, Victoria? My grandfather's watch is missing, she squealed with fake tears shining in her eyes. I left the gold Rolex on the entrance table 20 minutes ago because it was squeezing my wrist. I went to the bathroom and when I came back, it was gone. Alexander's face darkened. That watch was not only worth more than the average person's house. It was a family heirloom of Victoria's. No one has entered or left the house in the last hour, Alexander said in a grave voice. The security system is activated. Exactly. Victoria stopped and looked towards the service corridor, just as Eleanor appeared carrying her old backpack on one shoulder and Harry on the other arm, ready to go to sleep. No one has come in, but there are people who are going on a trip tomorrow, right? People who need money fast. Alexander followed Victoria's gaze and saw Eleanor. Victoria, don't talk nonsense, Alexander said, instinctively defending the nanny. Eleanor has been with Harry all afternoon. So empty it, demanded Victoria, pointing to the worn backpack. If you have nothing to hide, you won't mind, will you? Eleanor stood paralyzed on the threshold of the living room. She hugged Harry tightly. The baby, feeling her fear, began to whimper. Sir, I haven't taken anything, Eleanor said with a trembling voice, but looking into Alexander's eyes. I swear on my life. Then show us, insisted Victoria, walking towards her and violently ripping her backpack off her shoulder. Victoria, stop it, cried Alexander, taking a step forward. But it was too late. Victoria tipped the backpack over on the Persian carpet. A couple of old t-shirts, a plastic comb, a used book fell, and with a metallic and heavy sound, the solid gold watch rolled on the floor until it stopped at Alexander's feet. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander looked at the watch. Then he looked at Eleanor. His gray eyes, which hours before had looked at her with admiration and warmth, were filled with such a deep disappointment that it hurt Eleanor more than a physical blow. It was the look of a man who had begun to trust and had just been betrayed. No, whispered Eleanor, shaking her head with tears welling up. Sir, I don't know how that got there. Someone put it in, I swear to you. Liar, Victoria shouted, picking up the watch in triumph. There's the proof, Alexander. She's a vulgar thief. She took advantage of your son to rob you to your own face. Call the police right now. Harry burst into tears at the top of his lungs, frightened by the screams. Eleanor tried to calm him down, but Alexander raised a hand, stopping her in her tracks. Don't touch him, Alexander said. His voice was pure ice. Dead. Eleanor felt the world coming at her. Sir, please believe me. I said don't touch him, Alexander roared. He advanced towards her and took the baby from her arms. Harry stretched out his little arms to Eleanor, crying inconsolably, shouting, Mom, Mom! But Alexander did not give in. Victoria, call security, Alexander ordered while still looking at Eleanor. Let them check her room. Let them check everything. And the police? Victoria asked, anxious to see her in handcuffs. Alexander looked at his son crying in his arms, struggling to get back to the alleged thief. There was a tiny doubt in his brain, an intuition fighting against the physical evidence, and there was Harry's pain. No, Alexander said, there will be no police. I don't want a scandal in the press. He turned to Eleanor with a coldness that froze her to the bone. The trip is canceled. You are confined to your maid's room until I decide what to do with you. If you try to leave the property, then yes, I will call the police, and I assure you that you will rot in jail for years. Understood? But sir, Eleanor sobbed. Get out of my sight, he shouted. Eleanor ran out into the service corridor, drowning in tears. Behind her, she heard Harry's triumphant laugh turn into a heartbreaking cry that no one could console. Victoria smiled behind Alexander's back, stroking the recovered watch. The trap had worked perfectly. The manor house, which had been vibrating with a new energy for 2 days, turned back into a dark and silent mausoleum. But this time the silence was worse because it was intermittently interrupted by the cries of a child who did not understand why his source of happiness had been taken away from him. It had been 24 hours since the watch incident, and Eleanor was locked in her utility room in the basement, sitting on the edge of her narrow bed, her eyes swollen from crying so much. She hadn't eaten anything. The tray that had been left at the door was still intact. The only thing that mattered to her, the only thing that tortured her soul, were the screams that she heard in the distance, coming from the upper floors. Harry hadn't stopped crying. Upstairs in the master suite, the situation was desperate. Alexander was walking back and forth with the baby in his arms. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes and his shirt was wrinkled. That's enough, Harry, please, Alexander begged, rocking the child awkwardly. Dad is here. Everything is fine. But nothing was right. Harry refused the bottle, refused his expensive toys, arched back with his face red and bathed in tears, desperately looking for Eleanor. He had returned to that state of anguish, but now he was violent, active. It was not the silence of before. It was the cry of abandonment. Victoria entered the room covering her ears. "For God's sake, Alexander, can't you shut him up?" she complained. "My head hurts with that infernal noise. Give him a painkiller or something." Alexander turned to her with a murderous look. "It's a baby, Victoria, not a machine that you turn down the volume to. He's suffering. Well, call the nurse you fired or hire another one, but do something." Victoria looked at the child with annoyance. "He's clearly spoiled because of that thief. He got used to that woman's arms and now he's throwing a tantrum." "Go away," said Alexander wearily. "What? That you leave does not help at all." Victoria snorted and slammed the door shut. Alexander was left alone, feeling the most powerless man in the world despite his millions. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3 a.m. His son had been without sleep, without eating for hours. He was burning up an emotional fever. Alexander sat down on the edge of the bed, defeated, put Harry on the mattress. But the child only kicked and cried harder. "I don't know what to do," Alexander whispered into the void. "Forgive me, son. I don't know what to do." In the basement, Eleanor couldn't take it anymore. She could hear the crying through the vents. Harry's every cry was like a needle in her heart. She knew that Alexander had forbidden her to go out. She knew if she went upstairs, she could go to jail. She knew Victoria was waiting for any excuse to destroy her. But the maternal instinct is stronger than the fear of the law. Eleanor got up, washed her face with cold water, straightened her uniform, and opened the door to her room. The hallway was dark. The security guards were on the outer perimeter, but the house was silent, except for the crying of the baby. She walked up the service stairs barefoot so as not to make a noise. Her heart was pounding wildly. "I'm just going to calm him down," she said to herself. "If they take me prisoner later, so be it, but I won't let him suffer tonight." She came to the main hall. The door of Alexander's suite was ajar. The dim light was filtering into the hallway. Eleanor paused for a second, taking a deep breath, and then pushed the door gently. The scene she saw broke her soul. Alexander was sitting on the floor with his head in his hands, totally overcome. Harry was lying on the carpet next to him, hoarse from screaming so much, coughing and crying inconsolably. Alexander heard the movement and raised his head suddenly. His red eyes met Eleanor's. "I told you not to go out," Alexander began to say, but his voice had no strength. There was no anger, just absolute exhaustion. Eleanor did not respond, did not ask for permission, did not apologize. Simply crossed the room, ignoring the most powerful man in the city, and knelt down next to the baby. "Shh, my love, I'm already here," Eleanor whispered in that warm and magical voice that seemed to have a hypnotic effect. She lifted Harry off the floor and snuggled him against her chest, rocking him with a gentle, steady rhythm. The effect was instantaneous, almost miraculous. The baby's rigid and tense body relaxed at the contact with her. The heartbreaking crying turned into choppy sobs, then into sighs, and finally into silence. Harry buried his face in Eleanor's neck, holding onto her clothes with his closed fists, and closed his eyes. In less than 2 minutes, the child was fast asleep. Silence returned to the room, but this time it was a peaceful silence. Eleanor continued to rock the child, humming a very low melody, with her eyes closed and tears running down her own cheeks. Alexander watched from the silent floor. He saw the woman who had allegedly stolen from him, the criminal, risking her freedom just to comfort his son. He saw how his son, who rejected him and everyone, found peace only in those arms. A terrible doubt assailed Alexander. A thief steals valuables, but Eleanor was holding Alexander's greatest treasure as if it were her own. "Why?" Alexander asked in a whisper, breaking the spell. "I could have called the police right now. You could go to jail for disobeying and coming in here. Why did you come here?" Eleanor opened her eyes and looked at him. There was no defiance in her gaze, just a crushing truth. "Because he was calling me, sir, and a gold watch is not worth a single tear of this child. You can send me to jail tomorrow if you want, but let me sleep well tonight knowing he is safe." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. looked at the serene face of his sleeping son, and then at the honest face of Eleanor. At that moment, the cold logic of business collided with the reality of the heart. No one who pretends love can achieve such peace in a child. No one. Alexander stood up slowly. He didn't call security. He didn't scream. He walked to the door and locked it, leaving Victoria and the world outside. "Stay," he said, returning to sit in a nearby armchair, watching them. "Stay until he wakes up." It was the first crack in the conviction. It was the beginning of doubt. But Alexander needed proof, not just feelings. And he did not know that the security cameras in the house kept secrets that even he did not imagine. The light of dawn was just beginning to tinge the windows of the manor house with gray. But Alexander had not batted an eye. He had spent the last 3 hours sitting in the leather armchair of his office, with an intact glass of whiskey in his hand and his gaze fixed on the wall, while in the next room the alleged thief was sleeping hugging his son. He couldn't get the image of Eleanor entering his room out of his head. There was no fear for her own safety in her eyes, just an absolute terror for Harry's suffering. What kind of criminal risks her freedom to calm the crying of a baby that is not hers? Doubt was burning inside him. He needed answers, and he needed objectivity. Alexander got up abruptly, put the glass on the table, and left the office. He did not go to the bedroom, but to the basement, to the armored security room, where the recordings of the 30 high-definition cameras that monitored every corner of the property were stored. He said the access code, and the heavy door opened with a hum. The air inside was cold, refrigerated to protect the servers. Alexander sat in front of the main console, illuminated only by the ghostly blue glow of the monitors. "Let's see the truth," he murmured. He first searched for the recording of the previous afternoon, the time of the alleged robbery. It rewound to 1800 hours. Lobby camera. He saw Victoria enter the frame, beautiful and elegant, adjusting the watch on her wrist. He saw her leave it on the input console. So far, his fiancée's story was true. Then Victoria walked to the guest bathroom. The camera captured the empty hallway for 10 minutes. Alexander leaned towards the screen, squinting his eyes. In the 18th minute, Eleanor crossed the lobby with the backpack on her shoulder and Harry in her arms. She passed close to the console, very close. But just in that second, the viewing angle was blocked. Victoria had placed a huge delphinium flower arrangement earlier that morning that created a perfect blind spot on the table. Alexander hit the table in frustration. Eleanor's hand could not be seen taking the watch. She could be seen passing by, stopping for a second to accommodate the baby, and moving on. She could have taken it or not. The test was inconclusive. "Be it," hissed Alexander. He was about to turn off the system, resigned to the doubt lingering, when a different impulse assailed him. If he couldn't prove the crime, he would prove the character. He changed files, searched for the recordings of the baby's room from the previous nights. He wanted to see how Eleanor behaved when she thought no one was watching her, when there was no audience to perform. He opened the file from Tuesday night. The black and white image from the night camera showed Eleanor rocking Harry in the rocking chair. The baby was restless. Eleanor wasn't looking at the mobile phone or the TV. She was looking at him. Alexander turned up the audio volume. "And your dad is a very good man, Harry." Eleanor's soft voice was heard through the speakers, singing and sweet. "Even if he has that serious face and screams a little, he's heartbroken. You have to be patient with him, my love." Alexander stayed frozen in the chair. Eleanor was defending him, the man who treated her coldly. "He loves you," Eleanor continued in the recording, stroking the boy's forehead. "He just forgot how to say it. But we're going to teach him, right? Let's pray for him." On the screen, the humble employee closed her eyes, clasped her hands over the baby's little head, and began to whisper a prayer. "Dear God, please give peace to Sir Alexander. Take away that pain that won't let him breathe. Take care of him on his journey and make him come back well, because this little angel needs him, and I promise to take care of his treasure with my life. Amen." Alexander felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. The air escaped from his lungs. There was the woman who had been accused of stealing a watch to sell it, a woman who in the solitude of the night asked God for the health of her boss and promised to take care of his son with her life. The tears that Alexander thought he had used up years ago came back to sting his eyes. He rewound the video and watched it again and again. Such kindness could not be faked. This devotion could not be bought with even 3 times the salary. Alexander ran his hands over his face, feeling a deep shame. He had been about to turn this woman over to the police based on Victoria's word and on a coincidence. "You are not a thief," Alexander whispered to the screen. "You are the only pure thing in this house." At that moment, a new dark and slimy suspicion began to form in his mind. If Eleanor was unable to steal, then the watch had to get to her backpack in another way. Alexander returned to the recording of the lobby. He looked at the floral arrangement blocking the camera. He looked at the time. Victoria went to the bathroom. Victoria knew the blind spots of the cameras. She had supervised the redecoration of the lobby herself a month ago. Victoria, the name left his lips with a bitter taste. He had no evidence against his fiancée yet. If he confronted her now, Victoria would make a fuss, she would play the victim, and she could manipulate the situation so that Eleanor would end up in jail. Anyway, Victoria had contacts, lawyers, power. Alexander needed to be smarter. He needed to catch her at her own game. He turned off the monitors, erased the viewing history so no one would know he had been there, and stood up. His posture had changed. He was no longer the man defeated by doubt. He was now the calculating CEO who was about to execute a hostile takeover. He went up the stairs in silence. As he passed by his room, he saw that Eleanor was already awake, trying to sneak out so as not to wake him up. With Harry asleep in her arms, Alexander met her in the hallway. Eleanor cowered in fear, hugging the baby, waiting for the dismissal or the police. Alexander stared at her. He didn't smile, but his voice was soft, devoid of any edge. "Take the child to his crib, Eleanor, and then go get some rest. Do you have dark circles under your eyes?" Eleanor blinked in confusion. "Sir, what about the watch? The police?" "I'll take care of everything," Alexander said, putting a hand briefly on her shoulder. It was a light touch, but loaded with a silent promise. "No one is going to take you anywhere. You're at home." Alexander turned around and went to the bathroom to take a shower. He had to go to the office, or at least pretend that he was going, to give Victoria a false sense of security. The predator must believe that the prey was distracted, but he did not know that Victoria, from the crack of the door of her own guest room, had seen everything. She had seen the softness in the deal. She had seen that there were no police, and Victoria's fear turned into a homicidal determination. If the robbery had not worked to get the maid out of the house, a tragedy would have to happen, a negligent accident that proved that Eleanor was a danger to the baby. The morning was advancing with a tense and artificial calm. Alexander had left at 8 o'clock, dressed impeccably, kissing Harry on the forehead and saying goodbye to Victoria with a polite coldness that she interpreted as stress from the robbery. "Don't worry, love," Victoria had told him, fixing his tie. "I'll keep an eye on the house while you sort out your stuff." As soon as Alexander's car crossed the iron gate, Victoria's perfect wife smile faded, replaced by a grimace of disgust. She turned to the inside of the manor house. She knew Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing the special breakfast for Harry. "This is over today," Victoria murmured. She walked towards the indoor pool area. It was a magnificent space with high glass ceilings, a heated swimming pool, and the polished marble floor that shone like a mirror. It was a dangerous area for a baby, so it was always kept locked. But today Victoria had the master key in her pocket. She opened the glass doors wide, the sound of the pool water reverberating in the silence. Victoria pulled out of her pocket a small bottle that she had taken from the cleaning supply closet, a concentrated, transparent, and extremely slippery industrial soap. She walked to the edge of the pool, right at the corner where the hallway emptied into the wet area. With surgical precision, she poured the viscous liquid over the beige marble. The soap spread, becoming invisible against the polished stone. It was a death trap. Anyone who ran around there without caution would inevitably lose their balance. And if she was carrying a baby in her arms, well, that would prove that she was a clumsy, useless, incapable of taking care of a child. Victoria smiled, satisfied with her work. She put the empty jar in her pocket and ran to the other end of the pool. She took out her mobile phone and dialed the number of the kitchen extension. In the kitchen, Eleanor was cutting fruit into small pieces, humming softly. She was relieved by Alexander's attitude, although she was still afraid. The phone on the wall rang, startling her. "Valadare's residence," Eleanor replied. Eleanor, come quickly!" Victoria's voice sounded on the other side, screaming with a terrifying urgency. It's Harry! He got into the pool area. He's on the edge. He's going to fall. Eleanor's world stopped. The knife fell from her hand to the chopping board. I'm coming, she cried without thinking, without questioning how the baby had got there, if she had left him in his safe playpen 2 minutes ago. Panic overrode her logic. She only heard pool and edge. Eleanor shot out of the kitchen. Her rubber slippers squeaked against the floor as she ran down the main hallway. Her heart was pumping pure adrenaline. She visualized the baby falling into the water, drowning. Harry, she screamed as she ran. She arrived at the entrance of the pool enclosure. She saw the doors open. She saw Victoria on the other side standing, looking towards the water with her hands in her mouth, feigning horror. And she saw Harry. The baby was on the floor close to the edge, crawling, confused, but in real danger. Victoria had taken him out of the pen and put him there seconds before. Eleanor did not see the glow on the floor. Her eyes were fixed on the child. Don't move, my love, Eleanor shouted, and quickened her pace to intercept him before he fell into the water. She took 3 long strides. On the third, her right foot stepped on the industrial soap stain. It was like stepping on ice. Eleanor lost her balance violently. Her legs flew up, and her body tilted back in an uncontrollable fall. But in that split second, while gravity claimed her, Eleanor did not put her hands out to stop her fall. She did not try to protect her head or back. Seeing that her inertia would lead her to slide and possibly hit the baby and push him into the water, Eleanor made an unnatural turn in the air. She twisted her torso with a desperate force, throwing her body to the side, away from the boy, to act as a barrier between Harry and the sharp stone edge. Careful, she shouted. Crack! The sound was dry and sickening. Eleanor's head hit the marble edge of a decorative step with brutal force. Her body fell heavily to the ground, inert, but her hand, in the last conscious effort, had managed to gently push Harry back, away from the danger of the water. The baby, frightened by the noise and sudden movement, remained sitting on the dry floor looking at his nanny. Mom, Harry stammered. Eleanor did not answer. A bright red thread of blood began to gush from her temple, staining the immaculate marble and mixing with the invisible soap. Her eyes were closed, her chest barely moved. On the other side of the pool, Victoria lowered her hands from her mouth. The expression of feigned horror slowly disappeared, replaced by a cold look of calculation. She didn't expect so much blood. She didn't expect it to be so violent. But the result was the one she wanted. Stupid, muttered Victoria. I told him you were clumsy. She approached, walking carefully, surrounding the soapy area. She took Harry in her arms, who began to cry and stretch out his arms toward Eleanor's motionless body. Yes, that woman is crazy. She almost killed you, she told the baby, preparing her lie for when she got to the ambulance. She ran with the baby in her arms and fell down because of clumsiness. Yes, that will be the story. Victoria pulled out her phone to call 999, but before she could dial, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It wasn't sirens, it was the sound of a powerful engine. Alexander's car was speeding back, skidding in the driveway. He had forgotten his passport. Victoria turned pale, looked at Eleanor unconscious. The blood spreading, the soap on the floor that she had not yet cleaned, and heard Alexander's footsteps running towards the house, alerted by the previous screams that, ironically, the security guards had reported on the radio when they saw him arrive. The pool door burst open. Alexander came in panting. His eyes swept over the scene in a second. He saw Victoria standing with the child. He saw Eleanor on the floor looking like a broken doll in a pool of crimson blood. Eleanor! Alexander's scream was so heartbreaking that it echoed on the glass ceiling. He ran towards her, ignoring Victoria, ignoring everything. He threw himself on the floor, not caring to get blood on his suit, and took Eleanor's pale face in his hands. Eleanor! Breathe, please, breathe! She looked up at Victoria, her eyes shot with blood and tears. What happened? Alexander roared with a voice that promised death. What happened here? Victoria stepped back, hugging Harry tighter, feeling for the first time a real fear. The plan had gotten out of control. The red and blue lights of the ambulance were spinning frantically, bouncing off the white walls of St. Jude's private hospital. The back doors burst open and a team of paramedics rushed the stretcher down. Severe head trauma, possible internal bleeding, one of the paramedics was screaming as they rushed to the emergency room. Weak vital signs. Alexander was running to the side of the stretcher, clutching Eleanor's inert and cold hand. His navy blue suit was stained with dried blood on his knees and chest. But he didn't care. He didn't care that the nurses looked at him strangely, or that the people in the waiting room murmured when they recognized the business tycoon in such a pitiful state. Don't go, Eleanor, he whispered in her ear as they ran down the hallway. Resist, please. Harry needs you. I need you. The swing doors of the operating room opened. Sir, you can't pass from here, a burly nurse said, firmly blocking his way. It's my responsibility, Alexander stammered, feeling that the air was lacking. We will do our best. Wait outside. The doors closed, leaving him alone in the aseptic and cold hallway. Alexander stared at the red operating light that came on over the door. He dropped into a plastic chair, shaking. Minutes later, the sound of fast heels broke the silence. Victoria appeared in the hallway carrying Harry, who was breathing low, exhausted. She came impeccable, without a single stain, with that rehearsed expression of concern that she used for the cameras. Alexander, she exclaimed, sitting down beside him and laying a hand on his arm. What a nightmare. How is she? Has she already died? Alexander raised his head slowly. His eyes were two dark pits. She is in surgery, he said in a husky voice. And no, she is not dead. She is strong. Victoria sighed, adjusting her hair. Oh, love, it's a tragedy. Of course it is, but we have to be realistic. I warned you, that girl was not qualified. Victoria lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I saw her running like crazy. She was going with the mobile phone in her hand and the baby in the other. She tripped over her own feet. She's irresponsible. Thank God Harry fell far from the water. Alexander looked at his son. Harry had red and swollen eyes. When he saw his father, he stretched out his arms. Alexander took him and hugged him against his blood-stained chest. The metallic smell of Eleanor's blood was on his clothes, and paradoxically, that seemed to calm the child. She saved him, Alexander murmured, remembering the position of Eleanor's body on the ground. She had turned to receive the blow. This is not done by someone clumsy with a mobile phone. It is done by someone who sacrifices herself. It was luck, Alexander, insisted Victoria, upset by the lack of support. Pure luck. But well, when all this happens, we will give a good compensation to her family and we will look for a real professional, someone who does not put our son at risk by running on a wet floor. 2 eternal hours passed. The coffee in the machine tasted like rust. Alexander did not move. Victoria was pacing impatiently, checking her phone, clearly bored with the performance. Finally, the operating room doors opened. Dr. Reynolds, the chief neurosurgeon, an old friend of Alexander's family, came out. He took off his mask with a tired gesture. Alexander jumped to his feet, waking Harry up. How is she? The doctor sighed and looked at his notes. She is stable, Alexander. The blow was brutal. It caused a severe concussion and she needed 20 stitches. But there is no permanent brain damage. She was lucky. Very lucky. She'll wake up in a few hours. Alexander released the air he had been holding for 2 hours. He closed his eyes, thanking a God he had stopped believing in like that. A lot. But, the doctor said, and his tone became clinically serious. There's something else I need to tell you, something we found out when we examined her to see if there were any other fractures. Alexander frowned. What thing? The doctor looked at Victoria, then at Alexander and lowered his voice. That girl, Eleanor. Her body is a map of pain. Alexander, she has old scars on her back, cigarette burn marks on her arms that are years old, poorly healed fractures on her ribs. Victoria rolled her eyes, feigning disinterest, but listening intently. What are you talking about? Alexander asked in horror. I'm talking about that woman having survived hell, the doctor said sadly. These marks are of systematic and prolonged mistreatment. She probably ran away from someone very dangerous or violent a long time ago. I don't know who she is or where she comes from, but I assure you one thing. Someone who has suffered so much and still has the ability to protect a child with her own body. She is someone with a spiritual strength that I have rarely seen. She's not just a clumsy employee, Alexander. She's a survivor. Alexander was speechless. The image of Eleanor, always smiling, always sweet, was overlaid with the brutality of what the doctor was describing. She was carrying immense pain, and yet she had given his son joy. Victoria felt that she was losing ground. Well, that explains a lot of things, Victoria interjected dismissively. She comes from a violent environment. They are troublesome people, Alexander. That violence always haunts them. It is dangerous to have her near Harry, and if her abuser shows up at the house, he is a security risk. Alexander turned his head towards Victoria. For the first time, he saw her as she was, cold, soulless. Faced with the revelation of Eleanor's human suffering, Victoria's reaction was concern for her status and safety, without a drop of empathy. "Shut up," Alexander said. "Pardon?" "Shut up, Victoria, not another word." Alexander turned to the doctor. "I want to see her. She is now in recovery room 304. "Only 5 minutes." Alexander walked towards the hallway, leaving Victoria with the word in her mouth and the fury painted on her face. She took out her mobile phone and wrote a quick message. "He didn't die. We need to move on to plan B. Prepare the legal dismissal for negligence." But little did Victoria know that plan B no longer mattered, because as Alexander entered Eleanor's room, fate was about to send him the final piece of the puzzle. Room 304 was in semi-darkness, illuminated only by the heart monitor emitting a rhythmic and constant beep, beep. Eleanor was lying on the bed, small and fragile between the white sheets. She had a large bandage around her head, and dark bruises were starting to form on her arms where she had hit the ground. Alexander approached the bed with an almost religious reverence. He left Harry, who had gone back to sleep on a nearby sofa, and sat down on the chair next to Eleanor. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fine line of an old scar on her neck that had gone unnoticed before. He saw her hands, those hard-working hands that had brought laughter back to his son. "Forgive me," whispered Alexander, taking her hand with extreme delicacy. "Forgive me for doubting. Forgive me for not protecting you." Eleanor moved slightly, her eyelids trembled. "Harry," it was a barely audible whisper, hoarse and dry. Alexander leaned towards her. "Harry is fine. He's sleeping here. You saved him, Eleanor." She did not open her eyes, but a solitary tear escaped from her closed eyelid and rolled to the pillow. "Was the floor weird?" "Weird?" Alexander asked, holding his ear close. "Soap," she murmured, struggling against the sedation. "A lot of soap. There was no water. Only soap." Alexander tensed up. His analytical entrepreneur mind was instantly activated. "Soap. The pool is cleaned on Mondays. Today was Thursday, and the cleaning staff does not use pure soap on the marble. They use special machines." Besides, Eleanor said, there was no water. If it had been a splash from the pool, there would have been water. Just at that moment, his mobile phone vibrated in the pocket of his jacket. It was a long and persistent vibration. Alexander pulled it out, annoyed by the interruption. He saw the name on the screen. "Garcia, head of security." Alexander answered in a low voice. "What's the matter, Garcia? I'm in the hospital." "It's not a good time, sir. I know you're dealing with the medical situation, but this can't wait. You need to watch this right now." Garcia's voice sounded tense, urgent. "What are you talking about?" "When you left in the ambulance, you ordered to secure the perimeter. My men and I went to the pool to check the scene by insurance protocol," Garcia explained. "Sir, the floor was covered with an industrial gel. It wasn't an accident. Someone poured it there." Alexander's heart took a turn. Eleanor's words echoed in his head. "A lot of soap." "Keep going," ordered Alexander, getting to his feet and walking to the window to get full signal. "We checked the cameras. As you know, the main camera of the pool was under maintenance since yesterday, according to Miss Victoria's report." Alexander squeezed the phone so hard that his knuckles turned white. Victoria had reported the camera damaged. "But," Garcia continued, "Miss Victoria forgot something. Last week we installed a new wide-angle camera on the ceiling of the upper hallway, the one that points to the skylight. That camera covers a reflection in the glass of the balcony door." "Get to the point, Garcia. I have just sent you the processed and enlarged video to your WhatsApp, sir. Watch it, please. Sit down before you see him." Alexander hung up. His hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from a pent-up fury that was about to erupt. He opened the messaging app. There was the video file. Evidence pool stiff, a MP4. He hit play. The image was grainy at first, taken from a high and difficult angle, catching the reflection in a crystal. But the image enhancement technology did its job. A woman in a cream-colored designer dress, Victoria, was clearly visible. Alexander watched with an upset stomach as Victoria took out a bottle from her pocket. He saw her crouching in the corner of the pool. He watched her calmly pour the deadly liquid, creating an invisible puddle in the forced passage. Then the video showed something even more monstrous. Victoria stood up, took out her phone and laughed. Yes, she laughed briefly before dialing a number. The video progressed. Eleanor appeared running in despair. The slip, the brutal blow, the inert body, and then the final part that made Alexander feel like throwing up. Victoria was approaching Eleanor's unconscious body, not to help. She bent down and with a psychopathic coldness gave her a gentle kick on the leg to see if she would react. When she saw that she was not moving, she took the baby. Alexander stopped the video. He didn't need to see more. Everything fell into place. The watch, the camera blocked by the flowers, the dismissal of the previous nurse who left the way clear. It had all been orchestrated by the woman he was planning to marry. Victoria was not only a liar and a thief, she was a monster capable of attempted murder, capable of putting his son's life at risk just to eliminate an imaginary rival. A muffled roar was born in Alexander's throat. He put the phone in his inside pocket. He turned to Eleanor, who was still sleeping, oblivious that her innocence had just been proven in the most cruel way possible. "I swear to you by the memory of my mother," Alexander whispered, and his voice was so cold that he froze the room, "that she is going to pay for every drop of blood that you spilled." Alexander took Harry in his arms. The baby woke up peacefully. "Come on, son," Alexander said. "Let's go clean the house, really." He left the room with a firm step. He wasn't going to wait for the police. He wasn't going to wait for the lawyers. He was going to the manor house. Victoria was there, probably drinking champagne, celebrating her victory. Alexander was going to give her the surprise of her life. The midday sun bathed the main hall of the Valadares manor house, but the atmosphere inside was icy. Victoria, dressed in a pearl-colored silk robe, was sitting on the velvet sofa holding a glass of mimosa. Her feet rested on the coffee table, and a satisfied smile curved her red lips. In her mind, she was already redecorating the baby's room to turn it into a dressing room. Once Eleanor was fired for criminal negligence, and the boy was sent to a boarding school in Switzerland, when he grew up a little, the whole empire would be just for her and Alexander. "Health for timely accidents," she toasted to the air, taking a sip. The heavy sound of the front door opening startled her, though she regained her composure instantly. She heard firm military footsteps echoing on the marble of the hall. It was not the passage of a tired man through a hospital tragedy. It was the step of a judge coming to pass sentence. Alexander entered the room. He was carrying Harry in his arms, asleep against his shoulder. His face was a stone mask. Two uniformed security guards entered behind him with Chief Garcia at the head. Victoria got up, leaving the glass on the table with a nervous clink. "Dennis, love," she exclaimed, opening her arms. "You're coming at last. I was so worried. How is the maid? Have you signed the papers yet so the insurance will take care of her and not sue us?" Alexander did not respond. He walked to the center of the room and with a shake of his head, indicated to Garcia to close the double doors. "Sit down, Victoria," Alexander said. His voice was calm, but it had a dark vibration that made her skin stand on end. "Why such a serious face?" Victoria let out a nervous giggle, straightening her hair. "And why is the security here? You're scaring me." "I have said that you sit down," repeated Alexander, and this time the order was a lash. Victoria let herself fall on the couch, offended. "Alexander, I'm tired of this drama. That woman fell for clumsy. It's sad." "Yes, but you can't treat me, who am your fiancée, like this because of a third-rate maid." Alexander handed the sleeping baby to one of the trusted nannies who was waiting in the corner, instructing her to take him upstairs. Once the boy was safe and out of hearing range, Alexander turned to the huge 85-inch television screen that dominated the living room wall. "Garcia, plug it in," he ordered. "Yes, sir." The screen turned on. Victoria frowned. "Come on in, what is this? Let's go see a movie?" "We are going to watch a documentary about human nature," Alexander replied, sticking his gray eyes into hers, specifically about predators. The image appeared in high definition. It was the video from the upper hallway. The angle was unusual, but the clarity was undeniable. Victoria's smile froze. Her face paled until it turned the color of ash. She saw herself on the screen in her designer cream dress taking out the soap jar. She was seen pouring out the deadly liquid. She saw herself laughing. The room was left in a sepulchral silence, only broken by the sound of the video, the crack of Eleanor's blow, and the baby's crying. When the video ended showing the kick that Victoria had given to Eleanor's unconscious body, Alexander made a gesture, and the screen turned off. He turned to her. Victoria was shaking violently with her hands pressed against her mouth. "Alexander," she stammered, with tears welling up from her eyes. Tears of pure terror. That's false. It's artificial intelligence. Nowadays, they can fake anything. Someone wants to set me up. I'm sure it was her. She and the security chief are in cahoots." Alexander walked towards her slowly. He stopped half a meter away, looking at her with such deep disgust that Victoria backed up against the back of the sofa. "We checked the soap jar you threw in the kitchen recycling bin, Victoria," Alexander said gently. "It has your fingerprints. And the Rolex watch that magically appeared in Eleanor's backpack? Interestingly, the cameras at the jewelry store where you took it to be adjusted last week show that you never took it off until you got home." Alexander leaned over, resting his hands on the arms of the sofa, locking her in. "You tried to kill the woman who was taking care of my son, and even worse, you put my son in a deadly scenario. If Eleanor had not put her body as a shield, the broken skull would have been Harry's." "No, I had it figured out," cried Victoria, losing her temper, confessing in her despair. "I just wanted her to fall, break a leg so she could get the hell out of here. That starving girl was wrapping you up. I did it for us, Alexander, for our future." "Our future?" Alexander straightened up, laughing humorlessly. "You have no future. Not in this house. Not in this city." Alexander snapped his fingers. Garcia and the other guard advanced. "Take her out," ordered Alexander. "Now you can't do this to me," Victoria shrieked as the guards grabbed her by the arms. "I am your fiancée. My father is a senator. I'm going to destroy you." Alexander approached her as she was being dragged towards the door. He looked into her eyes for the last time. "Be thankful I'm not turning you into the police today for attempted murder," he whispered. "And the only reason I don't do it is because I don't want my son to grow up seeing his last name in the tabloids of criminal scandals. But listen to me well, Victoria. If I see you again, if you come within 5 kilometers of my son, me, or Eleanor, the video goes straight to the prosecutor's office. And I assure you that with my lawyers, you will not get out of prison until you are an old woman. Alexander, I love you. Forgive me." Victoria was kicking, losing a high-heeled shoe in the process, her dignity shattered. "You don't love anyone. Get out." The guards opened the main door and literally threw Victoria towards the entrance porch. Her designer handbag was thrown after her, falling on the gravel. The solid oak door closed with a definitive bang, sealing her fate. Alexander remained standing in the hall, breathing heavily. The silence returned to the house, but this time it was not an empty silence. It was a clean silence, as if they had taken out the garbage that was rotting the foundations. He looked at Victoria's forgotten shoe on the floor. "I'll burn everything she's left," he ordered an employee who was looking scared from the kitchen. "Her clothes, her photos, everything. I want this house cleaned up before dark." "Yes, sir," the employee asked. "Is anyone coming?" Alexander looked towards the hospital in the distance through the window. "Yes," he said, and for the first time in the day his eyes sparkled with something like hope. "The real owner of this house is coming. Prepare the guest room on the ground floor, the best we have, and fill the house with flowers. But not lilies. Daisies. She likes daisies." 2 days later, St. Jude's Hospital. The medical discharge had arrived. Eleanor was sitting on the edge of the bed, finishing buttoning a simple blouse that a nurse had lent her. Since her uniform was torn and stained with blood, she felt dizzy, moving fast, and the bandage on her head was heavy. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the anguish in her chest. No one had told her anything clear. Alexander had come to see her briefly the day before, but he was serious, talking a lot on the phone. She assumed the worst. Surely after the accident, she would be fired. Who would want a babysitter who slips and ends up in the hospital? They'd probably give her a check and send her back to town. The door opened. Eleanor tried to stand up quickly out of respect, but she staggered. "Qui," said Alexander, coming in quickly and holding her by the elbow with a delicacy that surprised her. "Good morning, Sir Alexander," she said, lowering her gaze. "Yes, I have my things ready. I don't want to be a bother. If you tell me where I should go to sign my waiver." Alexander frowned in confusion for a second, and then a shadow of pain crossed his face as he understood. She was waiting for the punishment. She was used to the world beating her up. "You're not going to sign any waivers, Eleanor," he said softly. "But the accident," Miss Victoria said. "Miss Victoria no longer exists in our lives," Alexander cut firmly. He took the cheap plastic bag where Eleanor had her old clothes. "And you're not going anywhere but home." "My house?" Eleanor looked at him without understanding. She had no home. She lived in the service room. "Come on, the car is waiting." The ride in the limousine was silent. Eleanor was cowering in the corner of the leather seat, looking out the window, afraid of soiling the upholstery. Alexander was watching her out of the corner of his eye. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the rough hands clasped in her lap. He realized how blind he had been. He had brought a queen disguised as a beggar into his house and treated her like just another piece of furniture. When the car entered the gates of the manor house, Eleanor noticed something strange. The car did not turn into the side service entrance, where employees always entered. The driver steered the vehicle straight toward the imposing main entrance, where the fountain, now clean and bright, was singing in the sunshine. "Sir, the driver made a mistake," Eleanor whispered nervously. "This is the main entrance." "I know," Alexander said without moving. The car stopped. The driver opened the door for Eleanor. She came down confused, shielding her eyes from the sun. What she saw took her breath away. All the staff of the house were formed in 2 rows on the entrance steps. Cooks, gardeners, guards, maids, all dressed impeccably, and at the end of the line, in the arms of the nanny, was Harry. When he saw her get out of the car, the baby let out a cry of joy that echoed throughout the garden. "Mom!" Harry writhed in the nanny's arms until he was lowered to the ground. The child, who had barely taken wobbly steps a few days ago, ran with that clumsy and adorable trot of babies towards Eleanor. Eleanor forgot about her dizziness, her stitches, and her fear. She fell to her knees on the gravel and opened her arms. The shock was emotionally nuclear. Harry crashed into her, hugging her by the neck, showering her with slobbery kisses, laughing and crying at the same time. Alexander got out of the car and stood behind her. He watched the scene with a lump in his throat. He saw how the other employees were smiling, some with tears in their eyes. Everyone knew what she had done. Everyone knew that she had saved the child. Eleanor looked up towards Alexander with Harry glued to her chest like a limpet. "Sir, I don't understand why everyone is here." Alexander reached out his hand and helped Eleanor to stand up with the baby in her arms. Then he did something that blew everyone away. In front of all his staff, the great Alexander Valadares, the man who never bowed to anyone, took Eleanor's hands between his. "Eleanor," said Alexander in a loud voice for everyone to listen, "for weeks you have taken care of the most precious thing I have. You have brought life back to this house, and 2 days ago you offered your own life to save my son without a second's hesitation." Alexander looked at her hands. Eleanor was still wearing some cheap woolen gloves that had been given to her at the hospital because she was cold. Alexander gently took them off, one by one, and handed them to the driver. "Never again," Alexander said, looking into her eyes. "You will never wear cleaning gloves in this house again. You will never enter through the service door again. And you will never bow your head to anyone again. Do you hear me?" "Before anyone, but I'm the nanny," she whispered, trembling. "No," denied Alexander, taking a step closer, breaking the professional barrier for good. "A nanny takes care for money, a mother takes care for love, and you are the only mother that my son recognizes." Alexander turned to the staff. "Listen to me, everyone. As of today, Miss Eleanor is not an employee. She is my son's parenting partner and my indefinite guest of honor. She is due the same respect as I am. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," the chorus of employees replied in unison. Eleanor felt that her legs were failing her, but this time it was not because of the blow, but because of the emotion. Alexander offered her his arm like a gentleman of the old school. Let's go home, Eleanor. Your room is ready, and it's not the one in the basement. Eleanor, with tears running freely down her face and with Harry laughing in her arms, intertwined her arm with Alexander's. Together they climbed the main staircase. As she crossed the threshold of the big door, Eleanor felt that she was leaving behind a life of pain and loneliness. She didn't know what the future held, or what exactly that intense look Alexander was giving her meant, but she knew one thing: she wasn't alone anymore. "Welcome home," Alexander whispered as he closed the door behind them, leaving the outside world outside. Harry clapped his hands, sealing the pact. 6 months had passed since that day when a limousine crossed the main entrance to change the history of the Valadares Manor House. Winter had given way to an explosive spring, and the house, which had once seemed like a cold museum of marble and empty echoes, now vibrated with a warmth that could be felt from the grill outside. The back garden was transformed. Colorful balloons floated tied to the white chairs, and a long table was filled with sweets and gifts. It was Harry's second birthday. Alexander was watching the scene from the terrace with a glass of champagne in his hand, but he wasn't drinking. He was intoxicated by something much more potent than alcohol: fullness. His eyes followed a figure that moved gracefully among the guests: Eleanor. There was no blue uniform anymore, no aprons, no yellow rubber gloves. She was wearing a coral-colored summer dress that highlighted her tan skin and showed the soft curve of her shoulders. Her hair, previously always pulled back in a severe work bun, now fell in free waves over her back, shining in the sun. She looked radiant, confident, self-possessed. But the most beautiful thing is not her dress, but the way Harry looked at her. The boy, who was now running with strong and confident legs across the grass, was taking off his feet. "Mommy, look!" Harry shouted, pointing to a butterfly that was flying by. "Mommy!" The word hit Alexander on the chest, but no longer with pain, but with immense gratitude. Eleanor had not forced that title. Harry had given it to her naturally because for the heart of a child, mother is not the one who begets, but the one who heals, the one who cares, and the one who is. Alexander walked down the steps of the terrace and walked towards them. Seeing him approaching, Eleanor looked up and smiled at him. That connection, that invisible thread that had been woven between them on hospital nights and on recovery days, was strained with electricity. "Sir Alexander," she said, even though he had begged her 1,000 times to call him by name. The habit of respect was still rooted in her humble soul. "I told you there are no gentlemen today, Eleanor," he reminded her, coming to her side and taking a napkin to gently wipe a chocolate stain on her cheek. "Just a family celebrating today." Eleanor blushed, looking down, but did not turn away from his touch. "I still find it hard to believe," she confessed, looking around at the guests, at the opulence that now surrounded her, but that had not corrupted her. "Half a year ago I thought I would go to jail, and today Harry is turning 2, and he is the happiest boy in the world." "You made it possible," Alexander said firmly. Suddenly the festive atmosphere seemed to fade for Alexander. He needed to do it. He had been carrying the small velvet object in the pocket of his jacket for weeks, burning against the fabric, weighing like a pending promise. "Come with me," he whispered to her. "To where? The guests?" "The guests are eating cake. Harry is playing with his cousins. Come here." Alexander took her by the hand and led her away from the bustle of the party, crossing the rose garden until she reached the place where everything had started, the conservatory and the indoor fountain. The place was silent except for the soothing sound of water falling on the volcanic stone. The evening light was streaming in through the glass panes, tinting the water golden and orange. Eleanor stopped in front of the fountain and the memories hit her. She remembered the fear, the cold water, the yellow gloves, Alexander's furious look that first day. "Here it was," she murmured, touching the stone edge. "Here I thought my life was ending when you came in and saw me wet." Alexander stood behind her, close, very close. He could smell her perfume, a mixture of vanilla and fresh flowers, so different from the smell of chlorine and cleanser she used to have. "Your life didn't end here, Eleanor," he said in a hoarse voice. "This is where mine started." Alexander gently turned her so that they were face to face. The golden light illuminated his face, revealing that the Ice Lord had completely melted. There was no hardness in his features anymore, just a vulnerability that only she knew. Before you came, this house was a tomb, Alexander continued, and his hands went up to cradle her face. I was a ghost who only knew how to sign checks and give orders. My son was quietly shutting down and I didn't know how to save him. I was blind. Alexander, I just needed time. No, he denied. I needed light. And you walked in that door with your cheap gloves and your shy smile and knocked down all my defenses without firing a single bullet. You taught me that courage is not in a bank account, but in throwing yourself on the ground to save someone who does not carry your blood. You taught me that loyalty can't be bought. Alexander paused, taking a deep breath, as if he was about to jump into the void without a parachute. Victoria is in jail, he said suddenly. The lawyer called this morning. She got 10 years for attempted murder and fraud. Eleanor shuddered when she heard the name. She can't hurt us anymore, Alexander assured, stroking his thumb on her cheek. That chapter is closed and burned, but there is another chapter I want to open, one that has nothing to do with the past. Alexander took a step back and put his hand in his pocket. Eleanor's heart stopped. Time froze just like that first day, but this time there was no fear. There was such a great hope that it hurt. Alexander took out a small, dark blue velvet box. He knelt not on one knee like in the movies, but with both knees on the floor, just as he had knelt that day in the water to cry next to her. He knelt down like a man who surrenders to the only force that has overcome him, pure love. He opened the box. It was not a giant and ostentatious diamond like the one Victoria was wearing. It was a delicate white gold ring with a central precious stone, an aquamarine of a deep and crystalline blue, surrounded by small diamonds that looked like drops of water. The blue of the water, whispered Alexander. The water where you found my son. The water where I almost lost you. The water that cleansed us all. Eleanor put her hands to her mouth, choking a sob. Eleanor, said Alexander, and his voice shook for the first time. I'm not looking for a nanny. I'm not looking for a housekeeper. And God knows I'm not looking for a trophy wife to show off at the galas. I'm looking for a partner. I'm looking for the woman who loves my son more than her own life. I'm looking for the woman who made me believe in God again when I saw her praying for me on a security camera. Alexander held the ring up to her. I offer you everything I am and everything I have, but above all, I offer you my heart that is yours from the moment I saw you defend Harry against the world. Eleanor, will you marry me? Do you want to be the official mother of Harry and the absolute owner of my life? Eleanor could not speak. The words stuck in her throat. She looked at the ring, looked at the powerful man kneeling at her feet with absolute humility, and then looked towards the greenhouse door. Harry was there. The little one had come in quietly with a pie-stained face, watching them curiously. Seeing his dad on the ground, Harry ran towards them. Dad, Poopa, the worried boy asked, thinking that Alexander had been hurt. The innocence of the question broke the tension, and Eleanor let out a laugh through tears. She also knelt on the ground, staying at the height of Alexander and Harry. No, my love, Eleanor said, hugging the child and looking Alexander in the eyes. Dad doesn't have a pupa. Dad is fixing Mom's heart. Eleanor extended her left hand towards Alexander. Her fingers, which had so often scrubbed floors and washed other people's clothes, were now trembling, waiting for a promise of eternity. Yes, she said in a clear, firm voice. Yes, Alexander. Yes, I want to. Alexander slipped the ring on her finger. It was a perfect fit. The moment the cold metal touched her skin, Alexander closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against hers. Thank you, he whispered. Harry, feeling that something important and happy was happening, got into the middle of the two, pushing them to get into the hug. Ow, cried the boy. Alexander and Eleanor laughed and wrapped the little one in a three-way hug. There on the floor of the conservatory, next to the fountain, which witnessed their first meeting and their almost tragedy. The fate of a new family was sealed. The water from the fountain kept flowing, cleansing the past, singing a song of new life.